fulfillment, it has been a thing that I have been on a pursuit for in a way that has introduced so much change, so much challenge, so much growth because of those challenges in this last 5 years of time. But it's a thing that I think we have to understand is likely going to come when we cultivate some of the courage to be willing to get to know ourselves well enough to take steps toward what we need to be fulfilled and answer some of the unanswered questions of why we don't currently feel as connected to that fulfillment in the first place in real time. If you are not as familiar necessarily with my story, I'll just give you one quick story. I had this opportunity to work at the Walt Disney Company for 17 years. The last 7 of those years, I was the head of sales at the studio where I had just one of the best jobs in the entire world. I put the movies from Pixar and Lucas and Disney and Marvel into movie theaters. It was fantastic until it got to a place where it didn't feel the way I'd hoped it might when it came to fulfillment. There was something in the learning curve of those first 3 years of my 7 years as head of sales where always being in a perpetual state of growth had me feeling something that was more connected to fulfillment, that after that learning curve was beat back a little bit, relationships were established, the leverage that came from Pixar, Disney, Lucas, and Marvel, allowing some of the things that a head of sales has to do to be done more easily, I found myself not having to study, but still getting straight A grades on tests. And thus was the beginning of a conversation about where I was going wrong in my pursuit to be fulfilled. I had been sold, like I think many of us have been sold, a bill of goods and how we might be fulfilled when we get a certain title, when we get a certain salary, when we do something at some point at a certain way that makes other people see us or affirm some significance in us or herald us as being good, the right kind of man, the good kind of girl, whatever it might be. And as much as I feel like I'd checked a bunch of those boxes, that dissonance that existed between who I believed I'd been put on the planet to be and how I was showing up in a way that might make the world happy was creating something that was the source of this disconnect from my fulfillment. And I began this journey. And it took like being in that state. Some of you might be there right now, where you can't necessarily put your finger on exactly what it is, but you know there's got to be something more. And to me, that feeling, as much as anything, is an invitation for each of us to start doing some of the harder work of understanding some of what we have to do responsibility-wise to change the way that we continue to sit inside of suffering that we've become familiar with. I know for me, as much as there was privilege in the job that I had, I'd become so used to just being okay with being okay, had decided that I could trade off feeling something deeper for the provision that might come from my family or the status I might have or the access that might be afforded because of this great job that I had. And then one day I realized, and I'm going to say this in a way that hopefully doesn't sound hyperbolic, but I realized that you're either growing or dying, that you're either taking steps closer to being fulfilled or you're not. And when you realize that you aren't, you have a choice to stay inside of suffering you've become familiar with or taking some stinking action, making some steps towards what probably is going to be uncomfortable, unconventional, and something that will, because of the discomfort and unconvention, unlock something that you need and have never maybe ever felt. So 2 things for me in my journey that I had to navigate in order to try and find fulfillment was really trying to zero in on purpose. Why am I here? Right? The crux of my unfulfillment began as I was cresting my 40th birthday and started asking these bigger set of existential questions of why I'd been given these gifts, but wasn't in a place to necessarily use them, why I was here, what impact was I supposed to have, how was I hoping to leave a legacy at the end of life, or how was I hoping to model who I hoped my kids might grow into as adults. And secondly, a conversation around integrity. The idea that once you have a handle on why you're here, that you also understand the way that you on an every single day basis have to make and keep promises with yourself to create integrity between who you'd have to be today to unlock who you ultimately hope to become tomorrow. Because it's in taking those steps of integrity where I have found fulfillment, or in the inverse, every time there's been dissonance between who I know I'd have to be and how I actually show up on this day, that's where my shame, my lack of confidence, my absence of fulfillment lives and thrives, usually in the dark. And here's where we start, right? So the first thing that I'm going to argue every one of us have to do is really get super comfortable acknowledging where you are right now, right? The pursuit of fulfillment requires that you start with hyper self-awareness. Knowing where you are is the first step in taking a journey towards that North Star of where you want to go, of getting closer to that sense of fulfillment, that connection to purpose. I've said often lately that I really feel like the work that I'm doing in real time is an attempt for me to take the intention that was set by a creator who put me here for a reason and honor every day with my actions the intention of that creator. Doing that, though, required that I first start by understanding where I am, and where, in knowing where I am, I'm not already honoring that intention, where I still have work to do, where I could challenge some of the things I think so that I can take action that, though it will be different and uncomfortable, might unlock some of the things that I'm looking for. So the first question all of us who are interested in fulfillment have to ask is, why don't you have fulfillment yet? Where are the spaces in your life where you are feeling unfulfilled or underfulfilled? The last time Brendan and I were hanging out together, we were having this conversation about the definition of freedom. It's like one of these things, like sometimes you just hear a line and it just sticks with you. And it has been this like echo in my head over and over and over, because I think in so many ways, freedom ends up being a foundational ingredient in fulfillment. And the definition we talked about was that freedom is the ability to be you, to be your true self, to be the person you were created to be, the person that you know you can be, free from two things: free from social comparison and free from self-doubt. Right? So as you're doing an inventory in real time of where you are, I want you to ask the question, how free are you to actually take steps towards pursuing the thing that will unlock the fulfillment you desire so badly? How much are you still affording weight to the worry of or the opinions of other people, to the constructs of society and the way they define the way that we're supposed to be, even if it comes at the expense of who you're truly meant to be? And then separately, how are you in belief of self? How are you, in a Mel Robbins-esque kind of way, giving yourself those high fives you deserve? How are you free from the worry of not being enough, of trying to talk your intuition out of the thing it's begging you to pay attention to? Because as you can free yourself from those things, you now start to get a little bit of a permission slip to take the kind of steps that'll allow you to get closer to who you were meant to be, your true self, free from doubting yourself, free from the way that other people might judge you along the way. This is one of my favorite topics of how getting from where I've been to where I am has happened over the last 18 months, 2 years of my life. Stillness, the like pursuit to actually be really intentional about getting calm has been a game-changing difference maker in a world full of chaos. And so I hope you'll pull your chair right up close to the screen, get out your notebook and take as many notes as you possibly can. Here's the headline, and this is not going to be a surprise, but in today's 24/7, 365 world, we have more modern conveniences, more time-saving devices than we ever had in our entire life. And yet, because those things are meant to make our life easier, they can sometimes feel like things that we're slaves to, that we're chained to, it actually in some ways can peel some of the joy out of our day because of the way that they, quote unquote, exist to make our lives better. And I will point to the way that social media, the way that some of our planning tools like Asana or Slack, right, like they exist to make our lives better. And yet when you get that notification, when you get that little reminder, all of a sudden it can be something that throws you into a feeling of overwhelm, into a feeling of anxiousness, into a state of stress, and into usually like a longer than you might necessarily enjoy to-do list that feels never ending. And so in a world where we tend to also put a ton of pressure on ourselves, right? That we are probably our harshest critics, this world order that we live inside of doesn't necessarily get easier unless we get really, really intentional about carving out space for stillness, carving out space for peace. I think like so often, if you're anything like me, it can feel like we're being sucked into this really fast moving whirlpool in more than one ways, right? Like financially, you might feel it. Whoa, you're getting pulled in because of your finances, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, right? All of these different dimensions of health, all of these different dimensions of emotion, they are things that get pulled on if we don't get intentional about being still, okay? So why is it important? Believe it or not, creating space for stillness every single day can be the antidote to feeling overwhelmed if you make it a priority, right? And so to get us started today, I'm actually, Brendan mentioned it, I got this book, Built Through Courage, it's coming out October 26th. I'm gonna read a little bit of what I put at the very beginning, because in the book, I'm talking about what it will take, what's required to step into the purpose for why you've been placed on this planet. And one of the most important fundamental ingredients, I argue at the very beginning, is stillness. So I've got it written here on the screen. Instead of having to watch me read, I'm gonna just read it out loud. Stillness isn't just a valuable resource for getting clarity on where you are. It's also important for maintaining sanity once you've committed to ditching the harbor. So in this book, I talk about the harbor being our state of comfort, the thing that has us sometimes connected to suffering that we're familiar with, playing by society's rules and norms, even if it might come at the contradiction of our purpose on this planet, okay? Deciding to move away from your familiar will introduce chaos in your life, and that chaos will take you under unless you have a way of regaining equilibrium. The storms that you encounter at sea will initially leave you wanting to cut your journey short and return to shore, right? I'm describing, for anyone who's felt the calling to step closer to purpose, the way that you will feel unmoored when you decide to make that leap and push away from something that you know for something that you need. You get away from that harbor into that water and it's choppy. Slowing down, getting patient, and creating space to process what you're experiencing is the only way you'll be able to make it through. Only in the calm, away from the chaos, can you nurture the courage that you'll need for the journey. Why do you need to create space to cultivate courage? Well, here's why. The world around you runs on noise. Never-ending marketing from the companies trying to convince you of what you desperately need and do not yet already have. The news business betting that they can keep you just scared enough to keep you turning in. Social media's comparison trap that has you triggered hourly by how your real life stacks up to the curated highlight reel of the people you follow. That noise creates chaos that will never allow you to get to the bottom of what actually matters. That incessant clamor drowns out your ability to focus on how you become who you were meant to be. How you become who you were meant to be is something that only reveals itself in calm, when you're separate from the noise. I'm just going to break down that last paragraph because I think it's important just to spend a second on this. The first thing I said that I think is important is the difference between needs and wants, right? You are inundated, bombarded all day long by marketing messages of things that other people believe that you need, what you need to be doing, who you need to become, what you need to achieve, right? They are working on a set of incentives. They are motivated by a set of values that are disconnected from your values. And yet, they all day long are trying to access you at a frequency wildly beyond any previous form of access to convince you with social media, texting, endless programming, streaming, email, that you are not yet enough, and they have the answer for what it is that you need. And so if you aren't creating space from that noise, you may in fact start to believe the stories that these marketers who get paid well are trying to sell you, that you will not find happiness until, you won't find peace until, you won't grow until. And if you can sit in calm, you might just be afforded some answers of what it is that you actually need, separate from their messaging with the bias that it has. And the objectivity of peace, you get clarity. Okay, the second one is media and fear, right? Because long gone are the days when you could turn on the news and feel like you were getting some objective review of what was actually happening in the world. Whether that spin comes from the left, the right, or center, there is spin. And news is a massive, massive business whose business model is fear. They know if they can create a news story that will create just enough fear to not push you away, but have you come back, then they will sell more advertising. And that fear, that loop, keeps us, all of us, in a state of more fear, more anxiety, more stress, more noise, even if we're not active participants of the endless news cycle. And I'm not suggesting that you turn off the news completely. I'm saying just be considerate of how much news is too much news. If the news that you're watching is actually helping you take steps toward who you know you are here to be, or is it in some ways keeping you stuck in that harbor because of them having won the fear being implanted in you? The third one was this idea of social media. And guess what? I am a broker of content on social media. So I am a big fan of social media, but also social media is, for the vast majority of people who are creating on social media, a highlight reel at best, at worst, a highlight reel. And if you are ever trying to do something new and you decide, oh, I've got a good idea, I'll go see how other people who are doing this thing I'm trying for the first time are doing, and all you get is highlight reel versions of they're killing it, even if, and as they likely are not killing it as often as they portray, it's not going to leave you feeling encouraged. It's not going to leave you feeling like you can actually do the thing that you're doing. Rarely do we see the real lives behind anybody who has an account. So when we're already stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, it doesn't take very much for any of us to feel less than, because we're comparing our very real lives to their very unreal, curated highlight reels. Now, beyond that, I mean, comparison in and of itself, everyone knows the Roosevelt quote that it's the thief of joy, and I believe that, but I'll also suggest this. The thesis of Built Through Courage is this idea that you were created with intentional design that is specific to you and only you, as in, of the billions of people who've ever lived and the billions that ever will, not one person will have your wiring, your gifts, your way of love, the way that you think, your experiences, which means if no one is like you and no one can do what you can do and no one was put here with the same exact intention as you, then the idea of comparing you to anyone is just a waste of time and emotion, because none of them, the collective them, was put here to do the things that you were put here to do. So I want to encourage you to connect to what your unique set of skills, your unique wiring, what was the intention of your creator? And if in that connection to what your creator intended you for, it gives you permission to be free from the trap that might exist in comparison online, fantastic. It is a poor use of time, and in the world of noise, guarantees the absence of peace and stillness. You need peace and stillness. I'm excited that we're going to talk about the challenge of cultivating great friendships. I say challenge because if you are anything like me, creating meaningful friendships as an adult is hard. Like, I can just acknowledge right up front that friendships are a premium in my life. They are a luxury in my life. And as I've gotten older, I find that they have at times become harder to hold on to. But I actually think maybe the important first thing for us to do today is to just normalize how hard this can be, right? Like, cultivating really meaningful, deep friendships is not an easy thing. We change, our friends change, or our friendship changes because of those changes, right? And so as we individually grow, if we can grow at the same pace as our friends, then everything is pretty fine. But here you are inside of GrowthDay, you are reaching for a better, different version of yourself. You are evolving every day into the next level of who you'd hope to be. And you may in fact have friends that have decided that they are okay with just being okay, that they're comfortable maintaining the status quo. Now your shared values will start to become unshared values. The needs that you have in the relationship to be pushed forward are going to be compromised by someone who is not pushing, but now pulling you back to mediocre. And so just recognizing that, hey, as you change, there's a chance that the dynamic of a friendship will change. Doesn't mean it has to go away, but it just might mean that some of the things that you do or are dependent on are now going to be different because you're different and the friendship inevitably becomes different as a result. So tips for cultivating and nourishing friendships. The first one is a pretty simple idea, but it's the idea that you be the friend you want to have. I know that sounds so simple, but Ralph Waldo Emerson has this quote: if you want a friend, you need to be a friend. Feels pretty straightforward, but like the kind of friend that you would hope for is the kind of person you have to be. If you were to meet yourself and you were proposing friendship, knowing how you act, knowing how you behave, would you want to be friends with yourself? If the answer is no, where could you tweak and modify the kind of friend that you're hoping to have? And can you show up that way consistently in this pursuit of cultivating a meaningful friendship? Second thing, and I don't mean to go to a place that sometimes can feel like a negative so early in my list of 10, but set appropriate boundaries and respect for your friends' boundaries. I just think boundaries is such an important thing because the compromising of boundaries ends up being one of the quickest catalysts to the ending of meaningful friendships, at least in my experience, the experience of my closest circle. I recently heard the idea of boundaries described as guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave towards them and how they will respond when someone passes those limits. Here's the box. I am living inside of it. If you cross the line of the box, these are the consequences. You're just stating very clearly that, hey, there's some rules of engagement. I love and respect you, and I need to be loved and respected according to these boundaries. They're just essential for healthy relationships and a healthy life. One of my long-standing friendships happens to be with someone who is an eternal pessimist. He's the grass is always browner kind of guy. Rather than seeing that it could go right, he'll itemize and inventory everything that's likely to go wrong. When the market moves down on 3 consecutive days, he's certain we're headed for a recession. When he got a recent promotion, we spent more time talking about the taxes he'd pay than we did about how he could finally afford a vacation with his kids. I love this man like a brother. And also, he's not invited to the table when I start dreaming about where I'm heading. His perspective, mindset, and hopefulness or lack thereof invite water into a ship that threatens my ability to stay afloat. Okay, this is one of my oldest and best friends. I am still going to pour into and nourish this relationship because it's one of the most important relationships that I have. But also, when it comes to my boundaries in this relationship, his pessimism, his worldview, his negativity doesn't have a place in my dreaming. right? And that's a safe boundary. Now, if he starts to cross into and wants to try and distort how I might pursue something, I'll cut him off, let him know, oh, this is not a thing that we are talking about today, my brother. Number 3, prioritize friendship if friendship is a priority. If you say, I acknowledge that this is one of my weaknesses, like I have represented to people that their friendship is a priority of mine, and then didn't back up that assertion with some integrity in how that reflected on my calendar, or how it reflected in my making phone calls, or it reflected in my availability to be there to listen to them on the days they needed to be heard. We talked about one of my favorite books, Essentialism. My buddy Greg McCune taught this like very important idea. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. So often we say that friendship is a priority, and then we allow the needs of other people to compromise that priority with all of the things that they want showing up on our calendar instead of the time we would have or should have otherwise carved out for our friends. If friendship is a priority, you have to make it such and have that reflect in your calendar. Have that reflect in the way that you do your everyday. All right, number 4, be yourself. Oh my goodness, be yourself, right? While you're working on becoming the kind of friend that you'd hope to become, you still need to be yourself, right? The real you with all of your strengths and, more importantly, all of your weaknesses. I have made this mistake. It is the absolute worst when you are trying to be who you think they're interested in as a friend instead of being yourself, because you will question if they like you, if they want to be in relationship with you, or this masked creation, curated version of who you think you needed to be. One of the best books I read in this last year when it came to relationships was a book by a guy named Donald Miller, and it's called Scary Close. It's all about the importance of intimacy in a relationship. And I will argue, like, you say the word intimacy, people think of sexual intimacy. Intimacy is just about being close, being seen as yourself, and it is an essential ingredient in any kind of meaningful relationship that you're looking to cultivate. He has a quote in his book: "The time we spend trying to become someone people will love is wasted, because the most powerful, most attractive person we can be is who we already are. An ever-changing being that is becoming and will never arrive, but has opinions about what is seen along the journey." Right? We are who we are. We want to be seen. We want to be affirmed as being good and worthy and enough as we are. And if we try and show up in relationship in a way that we think others need us to, we will never, ever know. We will always be questioning, and we will never, ever connect as ourselves. We will have no intimacy. And without intimacy, you don't have a real relationship. So this conversation for me today ends up more than anything being about priorities. I want to talk about how we think about what is important and what is no longer important at all. So I'm going to read a little bit out of this book. As I said, it's shameless plug. Dave, quit selling your book. Built Through Courage comes out October 26th. I hope you grab it. Okay. In a world that tries to tell us to be all things to all people at all times, it's crucial to realize that if everything matters, then nothing matters. That if everyone is important, then no one is truly important. That as much as we'd like to make a list of our top priorities, there is no such thing as top priorities. Only one thing can be a priority at one time. Okay, so there is this trick, this lie, this thing that has been sold to us in part as a part of hustle culture that we can, if we just try hard enough or work hard enough or get up early enough, be all things to all people. And we cannot. So give yourself some grace, give yourself permission to release yourself from whatever it is that you are holding yourself to standard-wise. You can't. And the attempt to be all things to all people only guarantees a single thing, that in trying to spread yourself across all of these priorities, you will spread yourself so thin that you never actually show up as well as any of those things end up deserving, in a way that actually underserves them and leaves you feeling less than you'd hope for to the people you love most or crave love most from. So you have to find a way to really create a priority for what matters most. For me, I'm going to say, I end up having a belief that you can have a priority in each of the areas of your life. So for me, I've attempted to identify, what is the priority for my family? What is the priority for my faith? What is the priority for my physical health, my mental health, my career, and so on? But we have to, at a certain point, make sure that we don't have too many priorities so that we spread ourselves too thin, because again, everything you say yes to comes at the expense of something else, right? Like if you say yes to one additional thing, you're basically saying, I will also then dedicate less time to this other thing that I previously suggested was important. It's just the way that life works. Why is it so hard to prioritize? So I think it's important to start with this conversation around priorities with understanding what it is that we as humans end up having as a block for creating priorities in the first place. So one of the things I would argue that most of us tend to suffer from, sorry if I'm breaking news to you, is FOMO, right? I think that we generally tend to be people who are afraid of missing out. We think that if we're not a participant in all things, or aren't involved in all things, or aren't in a conversation about all things, that somehow we're going to miss out. And I can tell you, as someone who has opted out of being a participant in all things, there is beauty in missing out. Because missing out in some ways allows you to be more present for the things that matter most. I don't know what it is, whether it's ego, whether it's vanity, whether it's insecurity, whatever it is that motivates you to feel like you have to be participating in all the things, push back against that fear of missing out. Because every time you choose to jump in, again, it's coming at the expense of something that likely matters more in your life. What's another reason why we have a hard time prioritizing? We don't like to let people down, right? If you are someone who identifies as a people pleaser, I also relate to you as a people pleaser, and the idea of not being able to be as present as other people might hope for us to be is a motivator. But showing up for them, if their values are disconnected from our values, or their goals compromise our goals, or the thing that they need in their time keeps us away from what would ultimately allow us to pour into our calling or our purpose, letting people down becomes something that actually has to happen. It's the price of entry for living into who we're meant to be. Does it make it easy? No, it does not make it easy, but it is, unfortunately, the thing that we have to become more comfortable with if we want to get closer to who we're meant to be. Why else? We don't totally appreciate what we can successfully accomplish, right? We don't have confidence in ourselves. Part of why I love this high five challenge, you're trying to every single day with this simple act of high-fiving yourself in the mirror, reinforce that you are worthy of being celebrated and that you, of course, can accomplish great things. And so we tend to struggle with prioritizing things that we could go out and change the world with because we don't have the confidence in ourselves. We don't believe in ourselves. And so the belief that comes in these little things of maybe it's a high five, but also maybe it's trying something new and showing ourselves in that new thing that we can do things that go beyond what we believed ourselves to be possible. It reframes what we think we can actually accomplish. Why else do we struggle to prioritize? I would argue that we don't have ourselves a clear why. Like, do you have a handle on your why? Are you connected to your purpose? The thing that I have suggested, and I would argue that you spend some time digging into this, is that there are three big things that you have to be connected to get closer to the purpose of why you were put on this planet. I have argued that each of us, every single one of you that's listening, myself, Brendan, and everyone else, was created with deliberate design in mind, and that the work we have on this planet is to honor the intention of our creator. How do we honor that creator's intention? For me, there's three things. If you are not connected to passion, you're going to struggle to feel like you're connected to why. So what are you passionate about? You have to start with passion, because as much as the next two things are things that I think you can manufacture, you cannot manufacture passion. You are either passionate about something or you are not. And so when it comes to your priorities ought to align, they better align with things that fire you up, that get you feeling excited about getting out of bed in the morning to go chase after them. Because if they're not, they are not sustainable. They are not something that is going to make you feel like you are honoring the intention of a creator that built you for very specific purpose. So start with passion. And there are a lot of resources. If you're struggling with passion, number one, you're normal. I have myself struggled to find my own passion in my life, and I found a bunch of resources that have asked a bunch of really weird questions to help me uncover what I have passion for. But most of it ends up coming back to curiosity and following the thread of curiosity, to dipping my toe in a bunch of new spaces to see, is this a thing that I have passion for? Nope, it's not. Move on. Yes, it is. Dive deeper. But passion is where it starts. The second thing is something that you can develop mastery around. So the question that I would have you ask as you're trying to connect to your why is, what was I uniquely gifted with or blessed with? How could my list of priorities focus on the things that I have been given a unique set of skills for? Because there is something in building on competency, building on a unique set of skills that you and you alone have been given, whether it's through unique experiences, wiring, the way your brain thinks, the way you love, whatever it might be. You are unique, one of one, limited edition in the way that you were built. And because of that, you have a unique set of skills that only you can bring to bear. What are those things? And how, if you leaned into those things, might you develop mastery over time? Because that mastery is the thing that ends up giving you confidence, belief in self, momentum on the days where things feel hard. All the things that you'd like to have to show up as the person you'd hope to be, not just on January 1st, 2022, but in January of 2035, right? Like, how can you develop and build on the things that you are uniquely gifted for? And the third thing ends up being, where can you take the things that you have passion for and the things that you are uniquely on this planet to ultimately bring to bear skills-wise to have impact on others? If you are not doing something currently that is ultimately bringing light to other people, trust me, fulfillment is going to be a challenge. Because every single thing in my life that I have ever felt pride or fulfillment for on a deep level, anytime I've ever felt like I was truly honoring the intention of my creator, it was every single time connected to how I was using my passion and my unique set of gifts to help other people. You're here in part because you believe in your ability to grow. And part of the conceit that comes in growth, to whom much is given, much is expected. You are expected to wield these gifts. So how can you have an impact on other people? All right, that was a long side journey on your why, but I want you to consider, what is your why? Because that will help you prioritize what is most important in these last 3 months of the year, and frankly, the next 30 years of your life. Today, I'm going to talk about something that I am describing in my next book. It is this idea of a linear journey of becoming. It is this idea of this progression that's going to move us from the safe harbor of comfort and familiarity that we find ourselves anchored to, through a ravine of fear, into a world of learning that ultimately affords us growth. So we're going to start with this idea of your safe harbor or your comfort zone. So as we jump into the conversation today, I want to start with agreeing up front, if you will indulge me, that growth is a requirement to being fulfilled. As in, I do not believe that you can be fulfilled if you are not growing. And I will also posit that I believe that each of us, every single one of you that is listening, is either growing or dying. Right? You cannot be in the middle. You are either growing or dying. And that if you want to be fulfilled, you have to be growing, because you cannot be fulfilled in a dying state. All right, stay with me for a second. But in order to grow, it is something that exclusively comes at the expense of comfort, right? Comfort is a casualty of growth. Comfort is a casualty of growth, which is a long way of saying that if you want to feel something deeper, if you are here today wondering, how might I feel more fulfilled? Well, then you're going to have to start by challenging your relationship with comfort, right? Like I said, the decision to leave your safe harbor for a lighthouse that might sit on the opposite shore, it is something that in many ways is linear. It requires that you move through these distinct environments in sequential order. I'm going to hold up a piece of paper. I don't know if you can see this forwards or backwards, so I printed it both ways. There is a lighthouse, and under the lighthouse, it says the word safe harbor. But I'm going to describe this progression of going through your safe harbor, through a pool of fear, into a sea of learning, to ultimately reach an ocean of growth. Okay? It is a linear thing, and the broader framework of this entire conversation is built with this eye to this reality that we have to think about our relationship to each of these things if we're going to effectively navigate from safe harbor to growth, right? Why do so many of us find ourselves living with things we are familiar with? Why is comfort so attractive, right? That's a place we have to start. Clinging to comfort is a byproduct, I will argue, of fear. Fear of the unknown, a disbelief that we might have in our ability to acquire new skills, the way that we've framed the risks associated with failure, the illusion that we may hold to us having some kind of control, the way that we think playing it safe will likely have certain things turn out. But as you've already heard from so many Growth Day teachers, there are dangers in comfort, right? There are trade-offs that come in choosing to stay inside of the suffering that you may already know and be familiar with. And so often we choose, and I'm one of these people, I chose to stay in suffering that I knew because it was more predictable than the fear of having to try and do something new. But now that I'm doing something new, even though it's scary, I can tell you there is riches in having pushed myself into that fear. I love John Maxwell. I don't know if you guys know John Maxwell, but he said the distance between where you stand now and where you want to be is measured by the changes that you're willing to make in your life. Okay? The distance between where you are and where you want to be is measured by the changes that you're willing to make. Change comes at the expense of comfort. Right? And so more than anything, as we have this conversation today, my hope in any of this is to equip you with the courage to make change, to challenge these relationships so that you might become open to the possibility of the good that can come, the growth that can come in redefining some of those relationships. I want you to connect to the courage and confidence that already lives inside of you to take one step and then another away from this place that you've known for all the opportunity to unleash the purpose and meaning that you deserve in this life. All right. One of the reasons I will argue also that we tend to cling to comfort and the relationship is so crazy, it's because of something of a belief that we have that the things that have existed or that currently exist will exist in perpetuity. Right? I think that's one of the biggest dangers of the safe harbor, right? Thinking that the things that we've come to know can be counted on. The pieces of identity or status, security, familiarity, more that live inside of like employment status or a relationship or a certain state of health you might be in, or a state of life that you're experiencing, that are all there, right? They're all there until what? Until a pandemic comes along, until downsizing happens, until you get a phone call from a doctor with a diagnosis, until divorce, until kids head off to college and it changes who you are to them and who you are on this planet, right? So it might sound a little bit scary, but we end up actually being in much better shape to meet the challenges of the future if we give up the illusion that the harbor is safe in and of itself in the first place, right? Like, part of what I hope that you leave the conversation with is just a touch more courage, a touch more resolve to consider the call that exists beyond your safe harbor. Even though heeding that call will often come at the expense of comfort, even though it requires you to reframe this relationship that you have with the familiar, you will inevitably have to burn the altar of what you know for the invitation of something new. And yep, that can be scary. But in this debate over taking the chances required to unlock the fulfillment that you desire, as you weigh these pros and cons of staying where you are because you believe that you know what this version of your life holds, what it unfolds, that control is an illusion. I am speaking from personal experience. This control does not really exist. Did anyone experience 2020 with me? This control did not really exist, right? So like, believing that you know how this life unfolds is actually taking a passive posture in reaction. You are choosing to react to the way that life comes at you instead of a proactive approach to engineering the kind of life that you'd hope for in fulfillment, right? So the closest thing that we can actually get to in being in control is when we end up being the person who's moving forward to actively create our destiny rather than waiting for it to be handed to us, right? Manufacturing our next moves instead of having to react to a move that is made to us. It is not a question of whether a move will be made to you or not. You are not going to win the no moves coming your way lottery. It don't exist. So you get to choose. Do you want to actively take a posture of engineering an outcome that you'd hope for, or react to one that you don't expect or want? I'm excited to be here today. I want to talk, like everyone this month is going to, about your health and wellness routine. But I think we got to start a place that is maybe the most important. That is, we are going to have conversations about building routines or thinking about health as it works best for you, right? As it works best for you. I think it's super important for all of us and every single class that you end up stepping into this month to appreciate that the journey that you're going to take for your health, all the routines that you might develop, they are wholly and totally unique to you. I have myself made mistakes in trying to lean into and take someone else's routine or listen to someone else's advice and apply it in my life, only to find that their routine, their plan, their diet, their mindset, their work on their health was appropriate for them, but not for me. And so sometimes when we start talking about health or have a conversation about wellness, there's this hope that there's a silver bullet, that there's this single thing that you're just going to be able to do. It's going to immediately jump you into how you'd hope to feel. And the reality, it's just not quick work. Transformation, building habits, having a routine that works for you or accommodates your lifestyle doesn't happen in a short window of time. It certainly hasn't for me. It's taken me years to morph and adjust my life, my body, my mind over time. And it's going to be the same for you. And I think it's important to just kind of set that frame up front so that you don't get too hard on yourself, so that you give yourself the kind of grace that you're going to need when you start trying some new things to tailor your health needs, your wellness journey to the things that you need. I have, in the last decade of my life, been what the medical community would define as obese, right? This tall frame, I'm 6'4", I've held 40 more pounds than I carry today. I carried it for years and years in a way that compromised my energy, affected my sex life, affected my confidence, compromised my mindset, made my blood pressure higher, and so many more things. And I'm 46 years old now. But when I was 30, 15 years ago, entering my 30s, I was not this lean, mean fight machine that you see in front of you today. I was the opposite. I had the hubris of a kid who never, ever contemplated the implication of not tending to my health and wellness. I thought I'd live forever. I didn't give that much a thought of how foods affected my body. I didn't see the benefits necessarily of moving it every single day or drinking enough water. I certainly leaned on too many coping mechanisms, drinking too much alcohol, doing things like eating my feelings in a way that was inconsistent with who I'd hoped to be. And now I want to shake that kid by the lapels, right? Every day when I wake up, I want to try and see how I can make up for that lost time. Yeah, what could I have done with that metabolism of a 30-year-old? What could I have done with these years that I didn't apply some of the discipline that I apply now? But what's interesting is I've also come to appreciate that bemoaning why I hadn't started earlier, having guilt or shame for wasting time or not focusing on the things that I'm focused on now, doesn't serve me at all, right? There's something in the same way that we approach mindset, in the same way we approach almost everything you're going to talk about with all of our teachers, not just this month, but every month, around programming, around limiting beliefs, that in some way inform how we've approached health and wellness historically. In a simple example, I've talked about how I've become a runner. I'm 46, I run a ton. Running has become this beautiful combination of church and therapy, but I only started running 10 years ago. Didn't run a single mile outdoors until I was 36. And in part, it was because I believed a story that was told to me, God bless it, by my mother, who was concerned about how tall people's hips, back, knees were affected by running. And I took her truth and I accepted it as my own without testing the hypothesis of what was possible inside of my own health. And then one day I ran and I didn't have the things that she was afraid of. And I became a runner for challenging this story that was handed to me as love, that was truly a reflection more of her fear. And as I unpacked that limiting belief, my mom is neither tall, she's not a runner, so she didn't actually have credibility on this component of my personal health journey. And so making that limiting belief for me untrue was something that unlocked an outlet for me that's become this amazing source of strength. And I don't know what your storytellers have told you in how you've approached health over the years. But one of the things that you'll inevitably have to do in this, your personal health journey, is understand why you haven't given as much weight to your mental health as you do physical. Not as much time to understanding your emotions and your emotional health journey as you might your relational health. Because there's something in storytelling that's kept you from indulging in and making equally important each of the big 5 components of health: your emotional, mental, relational, spiritual, and physical components of health, right? When I think about the idea of holistic health, the way I want to try and explain it to you is just like the idea of a wheel, the idea of a stool, right? If you think about those 5 components of health and are only really leaning into and catering to 3 of the 5, that bike don't ride. That stool don't support your weight. You have to find a way to consider the equal distribution of your attention and your intention so that you can create a holistic plan that actually serves you and the person you hope to become, the way you'd hope to feel about yourself when you're by yourself. Okay? So as we jump in here, I'm going to ask you to, on your piece of paper, write down a little bit of homework. Okay? In the work, I want you to be vulnerable, be honest. I want you to answer this question: how do you feel about yourself when you're by yourself as you think about your health and wellness journey? Right? When I've confronted these things that I don't like, where I've been honest about where I have room to grow, that's how I've developed my habits. That's how I've created my morning routine. In part, my hope is that if you can connect to that question, we're going to go into this full month of teachers that are likely to bring up things that for some of us is going to be just a little bit hard. It may even be somewhat triggering. Some of you are maybe more evolved in your health journey. Maybe there'll be nothing triggering. This is just going to be fantastic, celebrating good times. Come on. But there could be for some of you a stigma around mental health. There may be challenges for some of you in confronting some of the emotions that you feel that are connected to some of the experiences of your past. There may be some of you that don't like the way that body image or weight creates something of a trigger for you. Okay. If you can first start with understanding where those triggers exist, that's the first step. But I also, since this is the first of the conversations for an entire month on health and wellness, I want to start by honoring the fact that you are freaking here. You are here. You are here, and your decision to be here is already putting you on the path to developing something around health and wellness that is going to get you a step closer to whole. You're here, and in being here, it also starts with acknowledging that as much as you do want to identify where you have room to grow, that you are on day one, as you start the rest of the life's journey that sits in front of you, already good and worthy and enough as you are. Because if you start in a place of deficit, if you start in a place of shame, if you start in a place of inadequacy or scarcity, you will not be able to stick to anything that we talk about in this course or any of the courses for the rest of the month. You have to start by believing that you are amazing and awesome and glorious as you are, but also that you're allowed to want to start pulling on these threads to understand where you can take a step forward in your health journey in a way that shame is not invited, doesn't serve us, it doesn't serve you, it's not going to be an important part of how you actually make the progress that you want going forward. You have to choose, like I said up front, to develop something that is uniquely, specifically catered to you, which means that comparison does not have a part of this story. You're on your own journey. It's a journey that starts by honoring that you are amazing and here and willing to take a step forward. We're going to talk about values. Establishing a foundation for what you stand for, right? Identifying the non-negotiables in your life. They frame who you are. They frame how you hope to feel the day, experience your week, how you hope to show up in the world. But if you don't know what you stand for, if you don't know what your values are, you'll have no hope in actually focusing in on or creating discipline around the life that you hope to build, to enjoy. When I'm doing coaching, I did this last time. I'm going to do this probably every time. For some reason, I tend to turn to sailing as a storytelling device. I'm not a sailor, I'll be honest. But there is something about this idea of leaving a safe harbor from which we often find ourselves tethered to for the life of personal freedom, for the fully exploited potential that might exist beyond the jetty. The attempt, as I say, to honor the intention of a creator who very deliberately puts specific skills, gifts inside of your being. All of those things happen when you push into choppy water. So when I was thinking about how do I talk about values, I was actually drawn to a story I'd heard about something called ship killers. Let me explain. Ancient seafarers, when they were plotting their courses, originally it was by stars. I'm sure that they used some kind of geometry, maybe even depended on Dwayne Johnson from Moana. I'm not sure, but they often were looking at some North Star that kept them moving in the right direction, that regardless of the conditions of the sea, they knew to value so that they could make it on their journey. And as time progressed, maps ended up coming in. And so now instead of stars, they're looking at paper. And on the maps, there were particular things to take note of that were called ship killers. Rocks, islets, breakers, reefs, wrecks, obstructions, spoil areas, right? I said I'm not a sailor, so I had to actually look up what a couple of those things are. I didn't know what an islet was. I don't know what a spoil area is. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is, if you're going to head out to sea, damaging your hull or bending your propeller or anything that might keep you as the floating boat from floating. That might make it run aground or stop floating. That's not ideal. That's not a value, right? The value that any skipper has is to keep this vessel sailing, to do it in waters that allow it to traverse the sea safely and in as uninterrupted a way as possible as they make their way toward their destination, that North Star. And so the interesting thing for me about values is that core values are obviously things that help you clearly identify what you stand for in a way that designs guardrails around what you do, right? Follow that star. And maybe more importantly, what you don't do, right? Don't sink that boat. So the ways that you navigate and progress through the journey of whatever ends up sitting ahead for you is balanced in some ways around what you do consistently, discipline and focus, and making sure you're avoiding what you don't do so that you don't run aground. For me, I've got 6 core values. I'm not sure that there's a right number of core values, but I'm going to ask you as a part of homework to make sure that you can name the things that you personally value in your life. My values, centeredness, right? The idea that I am working to live, I'm not living to work. Advocacy, right? Showing up as an ally to anyone who may be marginalized or may not benefit from the privilege that I do. Growth, that I'm striving every day to be better than I was yesterday. Optimism, choosing positivity, hope in what's to come, the good that can exist even inside of hard times. Service, just wanting to put on the cap of servant leader in any and every aspect of life. And responsibility, the idea that I want to try and act with integrity. And those things for me are the North Star. Those are the things I hope to live into every single day. These are the things that I've signaled to anyone in my life that would be classified as an accountability partner, BRENDON among them, to be on the lookout for if I start veering off course, right? If I know that my work starts to compromise my ability to show up as a dad, or negativity in hard times starts to paint a pessimistic vision of my future, then I'm compromising my ability to reach my goals. I'm doing something that comes at the expense of my value, and I might, because of that disconnect, undermine how I actualize my actual calling, right? So I know why I'm on this planet, right? I'm on this planet to change it, to have impact on it, right? The purpose of my creation is a reflection of the values that I hold. And I will argue they need to be a reflection of the values that you hold. And so I want to keep my family a priority, advocate for others, chase growth, see the good, serve well, and do it in a way that creates consistency between my ambition and my everyday actions. And if I drift away from my core values, right, I run into a ship killer. I slow at best or sink at worst my pursuit of becoming who I'd hope to be. So for you, homework starts with a question. And it's a very simple one. What do you stand for? What do you stand for? Unless you know what you stand for, unless you know your core values, you don't have a sense, you don't have a handle on what it is that you're going to need to do. So you have to set that North Star, right? Create the guardrails that reinforce what you do and what you don't do. Be clear about who and how you'd hope to show up as every single day. And then you give yourself the chance to actually be that person. Answer this question. What do you stand for? Create a list of your core values. What attributes would you need to have present every single day in your life, all the time, to have anyone who's witness to you living your life know without a doubt what it is that you stand for, right? Knowing what you stand for is going to be a big part of how we help cast the vision for where you're going, where you're going to focus your energy and how you'll deploy your discipline to actually get there.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.